Dragon Ball fights have sucked for a long time, and it's all because of one word: choreography. And yet, the show that I was least hyped about in the entire production history of this franchise, Dragon Ball Daima, appears to be the one that is fixing it. And I'll be honest with you, like most other longtime fans, I was not very excited for this show. But based on these fights alone, your boy's in. From just these first 4 episodes alone, the fight scenes in Daima are miles ahead of all the fights in Super except for the Broly movie. And please keep in mind that good animation and good choreography are not the same thing. Hell, the Broly movie alone is a good example of that. It's always wonderfully animated, but there's parts in the choreography where you just can't tell what's happening, and I would call that pretty bad. You can argue that Dragon Ball is about a lot of stuff, but martial arts is core to its identity as a series, which, to be honest, with the exception of the Broly movie, has almost completely bottomed out in all of Super. If you just shut off all the visual effects, Super has some of the lamest fights in the entire franchise. I know I'm getting older and Super was not exactly made for me in my generation, but I don't see how you can think shit like this is hype when fights like these have already existed for a decade at this point. But what's even funnier than that is that original flavored Dragon Ball was amazing with their action, on top of it being hilarious to watch sometimes.
What are you doing, Bulma?
You hear about all of these crazy guest animators being hired on for different shows like My Hero Academia or One Piece, and it feels like that never happened for Super. Again, with the exception of the movie, which is pretty fucking goated. And I know that doesn't exactly sound like a fair comparison because there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff we're not privy to. However, I'm also aware that a lot of newer fans of Dragon Ball haven't actually seen the original series. So instead of cherry-picking awesome fights from Cowboy Bebop or My Hero or whatever else is new these days, let me just cherry-pick a good fight from the original Dragon Ball. There's enough going on in this fight between Goku and Krillin that you could fill out an entire video essay on it just by itself. However, it all just brings me back to the issue I have with fight choreography. While Z did escalate the action and it kinda drifted more into that reusing of animation frames and heavier emphasis on key attacks, there is still a distinct martial art flair to how a lot of these fights play out. But in Super, I'm gonna be honest, sometimes it feels like they threw all of that shit completely out the window for new visual effects. Don't get me wrong, like most shows, there's always hints of greatness somewhere to be found. But for the most part, I was consistently let down with the choreography from a martial artist view. And this brings me to Daima. Right out of the gate, we get some wonderful reimaginings of some of the Blue Arc's most important fight sequences. And while I do agree that this was most likely done to pander to nostalgia, it does kinda highlight how much we could really use a redrawn version of Dragon Ball Z, especially with whoever directed these fights. However, it gets even better, at least in my opinion, when the show actually gets going and Goku is forced to rely on his power pole and Kung Fu again. Because the characters are forced to get away from Superman-style sonic boom punches and planet-destroying ki blasts, we're actually able to squeeze out more creativity because we have to play by more rules. And then this gets into actual choreography theory. There's a bunch of different ways to approach building a fight scene, but I like to follow these 3 rules that I set for myself every time the job is handed to me. And part of the reason I've been gone so long is that I'm now doing this professionally. My first IMDb credit is literally fight choreographer. But back to the point. The single most important rule by far is that every action and beat needs to both serve the story and be character driven. With my last gig, I was also given the task to train up the actors and make them comfortable fighting on camera. The major tip I had for that, besides just repetition and training, is that every movement you make, and even the way that you hold yourself in a scene, tells the audience things about your character. And my favorite examples for this point are Bruce Lee, Jackie Chan, and Keanu Reeves. All of these guys are amazing action performers, but notice the way each one of them carries themselves in the heat of the moment. All of them are skilled, all of them are badass, and all of them are protagonists, but each one of them just gives you a different vibe. And all of it comes down to making each movement a conscious choice by the actor. There's a wonderful YouTube video by Doodly called Animators Are Actors, and I could not agree more just on the title alone. Because when you're an animator, you're the person that has to make all of those conscious choices, not the voice actor.
I've been going at about 80% myself. What?
And every time I watch a fight from Daima, I can't help but get the feeling that whoever is holding the pin in that moment is making a conscious decision on what that character is doing. But that's only my first point. The second one is that every movement needs to do its best to be unique. And unfortunately, this is the point that Dragon Ball has always suffered from the hardest because animation is really fucking hard. It's super easy and convenient to pad out a fight by repeating the same blocks or animation loops over and over. And just like when live action properties do it, eventually the audience starts to catch on and their eyes kinda glaze over. They get bored of the action because it's not going anywhere because we're literally seeing the same thing over and over. And if we see the same thing over and over, then that means there is no urgency. And if there is no urgency, that means there are no stakes, and we just stop caring at that point. Yet again though, whoever is in charge of directing Daima, or at least the rotating cast of directors, seems to have a great grasp on when to let the animations loop and when to move on to the next beat. And this brings me to my third and final point for choreography. Try to involve everything on screen in the action. As I'm sure you can guess, the best example I have for this is 9 out of 10 Jackie Chan fights, especially in his golden era. When Jackie is throwing down, everything you see in the frame could potentially be involved within the next 30 seconds. Whether that's Jackie being thrown through a glass table, or somebody picking up a ladder, or even doing some crazy parkour before that name was even created. It doesn't matter. The environment is always a participant too. But instead of using an obvious example that most everybody is familiar with, I'm gonna reference a different show that I don't think was given enough credit for its action sequences. And that's the Netflix Yu Yu Hakusho remake. Personally, I have no idea what the reception to this show was. All I know is every time Yusuke was in a fight, that shit popped the hell off, at least in the first half. I like to describe these fight scenes as a cross between The Raid and classic Jackie Chan. Because almost every time something is shown in the environment, Yusuke ends up using it in some way. And that not only crosses off the third point in my list of choreography tips, but it also checks off the second and first. Because not only is everything being shown to the audience a potential participant in this sequence, but it's also unique and visually distinct, while also being character-driven and selling us more on Yusuke's character. Because of course the delinquent thug would use whatever means he could to win the fight. And from what little bit I've seen of Daima so far, we seem to be hitting all three of these points more often than not. Especially with examples like the bar fight, where Goku is throwing down while trying to enjoy his food at the same time. And yep, that's gonna do it for this video. All in all, I'm extremely excited for the future of Dragon Ball, especially since now it feels like it's catching up with all the other anime that have released crazy action since Dragon Ball started. I am so sorry it took me this long to put something else out, but I gotta tell you, after working on films as an actor and a stuntman and a fight choreographer, it is just really hard to feel motivated to talk about other people's work now. Like, I'm sorry, I don't care what Red Letter Media says, it's a fucking blast to work on movies and TV shows.
Every single aspect of making movies is a giant pain in the ass. And it's never worth it.
Yeah, that is total fucking bullshit. Do not listen to them. This stuff is a blast and a half. And it's just so much more creatively fulfilling to make your own stuff than it is to talk about other people's. However, Dragon Ball means a lot to me and it always will, so I felt compelled to make this video that I've been planning to work on for a long time, and I'm glad that it's finally out there and I'm able to talk about it in a positive light. Because I'm gonna keep it 100 with you, if Daima didn't exist, this video would not be positive. Also, I'm sure this video comes off as under-edited, but the truth is, I'm just completely over the micro-edit format that YouTube has been defined by these days. It also feels like, to me, the platform's kinda getting away from excess-style content that Mr. Beast pioneered, and it's moving back to a more genuine, authentic place like in the Golden Era. So at this point, I'm just not really worried about keeping up with the meta, you know what I mean? I'm just gonna make the videos that I want to see in the world. But for now, I'm bowing out. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you later.